Hey guys, my name is Katie Marino and I am the founder of OrganizedAdvisor.com. I am so excited to bring you the delicious design lesson today. This is one of my absolute favorites. I love teaching this to students. Students love doing this lesson because they get to eat some food at the end. It's super memorable, and I think it just does a really good job of teaching the basic parts of a yearbook layout. So this is something that I actually started back in 2014 when I was a first year baby teacher. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't have a background in education. I had never heard the term pedagogy or differentiation before in my life. Before I started teaching, I actually went into marketing. I thought that I was going to work for a prestigious magazine. And I kind of bounced around and I realized I hated cubicle life. And so teaching kind of found me and I just fell in love with it and I never looked back. I was an advisor for about 6 years and now I'm an independent consultant and I get to teach awesome advisors like you how to be organized and how to make things a little easier. And so it's a little less stressful to be an advisor because it's a lot. You're juggling a lot all at one time. And so this is one of my absolute favorites. So this is such a good lesson because I think it helps kids really remember all the different parts of a yearbook layout. So let's get started by talking about the ingredients you'll need.
Fettuccine or linguine, something flat so it doesn't roll around. Twizzlers, graham crackers, Kit Kat bar, Airheads, Cheez-Its, marshmallows, Fruit Loops, Skittles or M&Ms, and chocolate chips. Alright guys, so what you're looking at right here is a layout sheet. You can get these from your publisher. They have the full-size ones. This is for a 9x12 book. They also have mini versions that you can get, and it's really helpful to show students just how to sketch things out. It's a lot easier on paper. Our brains work a lot faster with pencil and paper versus on the computer. You open this up, it's a big blank white screen, and it can be really intimidating. And so this is a great way to practice doing layouts and make sure kids have all the necessary elements, as well as just start to draft some spreads really fast and kind of get some ideas moving before you transfer them to the computer. So this one I have laminated. I just actually covered it with packing tape, but you can laminate it, and that's because I do this a lot and it lasts a little bit longer. But they're also disposable. The publisher will give you a big stack of them. So I laminate mine for the food lesson, which you can do if you're kind of putting together like a kit, but otherwise just the disposable ones are totally fine. So a couple things I want to point out before we get started. Looking at this, you'll notice there are 8 columns. If you look at it really close up, you can see that within those columns there's grid lines. Each grid line is numbered, so when you're teaching kids, you can kind of refer to the numbers that are there, and horizontally and vertically. This gray border out here, those are the 2 picas that we don't want text to go into, because when they're printing and then they cut your pages, that might get cut off, and we don't want anything too close to that edge. And then we have a white margin space as well, just to make sure we have lots of white space around the entire edge. And then we have our columns in the middle, which help us create modular design. There are a lot of ways to break these rules of designing in columns once you learn the basics. So I will say, if you are teaching this to students who have been on Yearbook before, or if you're an advisor that has a couple years experience, this lesson is a little bit basic. And so just know that you might have kids be like, but I want to put something across the eye line, or I want to go across the axis. That is okay to break the rules once you know the rules. And so just kind of reiterate that this is very, very basic. This is just a starting point. Once we get the basic layout done, then you can always add to it and stuff like that. So this is the blank version. I also like to make, when I'm teaching this, a completed version just with marker. And so this kind of shows students where we're going. And so you can make this just with markers and a ruler and demonstrate that you have a dominant photo, you have a secondary photos that are roughly all different sizes. You have room for your story, your sub headline, and your headline. You have a caption for each photo, and I like to point out this caption goes with this photo, this caption with this one, and I'll literally go around to each one to indicate that they're all there. And then the folios, the page numbers on both sides, to show them where they're going with this. All right, so the first ingredient you're going to need is linguine or fettuccine. Either type works, and you want the flat kind so it doesn't roll around. And this is going to be our eye line. And so you want to tell kids that it needs to be in this middle third of the spread. You don't want it super high up here, because then it's really small to put anything above it. You don't want it super high at the bottom for the same reason. Anything you put below it is going to be super tiny. And so in this middle third section, somewhere you want to place your eye line. And the only thing I would say is don't have them put it right in the middle. You know, like that would be kind of boring to just split a spread right down the middle. And so I like it a little bit higher or a little bit lower. So for this purpose, I'm going to put it right at about 46. So I put it in between 46 and 47. And what your eyeline does is it serves as an anchor point. And so everything on your spread is either going to sit on the eye line or hang down from below it. And what it does is it draws your eye into something stabilized in the middle instead of things being all over and crazy and everywhere. Similarly, we are going to put on our axis. And so I like to do the axis with Twizzlers. And so what you want to do, same thing, is it's going to be in this middle third of the spread. And so I'm going to put mine right here in between these columns. It doesn't have to be in a column, but it's just easy, especially when you're teaching the super basics, to start using the grid that's already there. Because we're using food, things are going to move around just a little bit, and that's okay. So the idea here is that nothing crosses over the eye line and nothing crosses over the axis. These are our anchor points. Okay, so now that we have our eye line and our axis, these serve as our guidelines. Remember that they are just to serve as an anchor, and the first thing we're actually going to put on our spread is our dominant photo. And so the dominant photo needs to be the biggest thing on the spread, the biggest photo, biggest element on the spread. And so we want to make sure that we put it in the biggest quadrant. And so for us, because we put our eye line and our axis where we did, this is going to be our biggest quadrant, and so we're going to put our dominant photo right here. We want our dominant photo to be right up against the axis and right sitting on the eye line, and so we need it in this area here. I'm going to work with these columns that we have right now, but just so you know, when you get to working on your layout, you can set your spread up with more columns or less columns depending on what you want to do. And so, for right now, I'm just going to use these 4 columns. I'm going to end my photo right here. So the food item for photos is totally up to you. So depending on how many groups you have working and the budget that you have available, I have a bunch of different options that you can use for this. So the first one is going to be graham crackers. Reason I like these is because you can do big sheets of graham crackers, which take up a lot of space, which is nice. And then you can also break them down into smaller areas if you need to fill in the other sections. And so it's not going to be perfect. Remember, we're working with food here, so it's not going to be like the exact right size that we need it to be, but you can get pretty close just to demonstrate that this area here is a photo, right? So that looks pretty good. Now, if you want to try some different options, some other things that I've seen that worked really well are tortillas. These are just corn tortillas that I've cut up. You can get a whole bunch of them for pretty cheap, and they work for different size photos as well. Like you can see that even fits pretty well in there. And you can let kids cut them up, and it's kind of fun to play with, honestly. I've also seen loaves of bread. So this is just a loaf of white bread with a crust cut off. Same thing, and you can also cut them down into smaller pictures. And so if we had a picture here, which we will later, that is one column, like you could cut this pretty easily, and then it takes up a lot of space, and it can be different sizes. You can also use different sized crackers, and so instead of using the big graham crackers, we could use different sizes. So these are chicken and a biscuit crackers, and then these are club crackers. Like you can just play around with kind of whatever fits best on the layout that you have. Chicken and a biscuit fits pretty well in these columns. And then I also really like Cheez-Its. The only problem is that you need a ton of Cheez-Its to make this work, but you can make little tiny photos like this, or you can add more. So let's pretend we have a photo here. You can add more Cheez-Its and make different size photos, which is nice, and they fit pretty well. The only problem is that you just need a ton of Cheez-Its to cover this entire layout. So totally up to you. I've also tried fruit roll-ups. They're just very sticky, but they also take up a lot of surface area, so that can be another element. And I also sometimes have them cut them, but from what I found, they're like, you can even see that it's kind of too sticky. But kids like eating this more than like white bread, so up to you. For us today, we're gonna use the graham crackers because they fit pretty well, but I just wanted to show you those options. Okay, so once we have our dominant photo, we need to add our story. And so we're gonna add a story that goes along with this photo. But it's really important that we make sure our story has a headline. So for our headline, I like to use Kit Kats. This one's already been broken, but I always like to use this because it comes in packs of 2, and they always come together. And so you're gonna have a headline and a subhead, and they always come together, and it's not ever one without the other. But I separate them because I want to show that they are 2 separate elements, but they always come together. Like Kit Kats are always in a pair. And so I'll put those right here. We're gonna pretend that we put our headline here. I will say that for a traditional story, you're typically gonna have 2 columns, in which case you would maybe need to adjust how big this picture is in order to make room for 2 columns. But for right now, we're just gonna say that maybe it's an alternative story, it's like a quick Q&A or something, and so we're gonna have our headline and our subhead here, and then we're going to have our story. For our story, I like to use airheads. You can use whatever you want for these. I will say don't unwrap these because they will stick to the paper and the kids won't be able to eat them. But I like the minis because you can put 2 side by side and that can represent 2 columns of a story. And as you can see, they're not both going to fit right here, so we're just going to say that we have a 1 column kind of area for a story, but we want to make sure that we have area for a story, our subhead, and our headline with our dominant photo. And these kind of all go together, they're kind of packaged together because whatever our story is about should relate to our dominant photo. Okay, next we're going to add the rest of our photos. And so we're going to use the graham crackers, and you're going to tell the kids to break them up really gently because sometimes they don't break on the right spot, kind of like those. And you're going to fill in the spots in the rest of the layout, making sure that you leave space in between each element. And so if I start to fill in a photo right here, you can see, well, actually I could start with a full one. And then say I fill in this photo right here. Obviously it's not going to fit perfect, but you want to make sure that they know that if you have an element, it needs to go all the way to the edge of a grid line, and then you skip one. That's a pica. Each grid on the layout is 1 pica, and so you want to make sure that they know to skip one, and then the next element starts right after. And so I'm just going to fill in as best I can. Obviously it's not perfect. We're just going to break that. Break it a little bit more. Great. Okay, I have crumbs everywhere now. Then we're going to have another photo that starts, it skips 1 grid line and it starts right here. It's a little bit hard to tell because these don't fit perfectly, but you want to make sure when you go around and check students' layouts that they know that this is an empty space right here. And I'm going to make sure that I leave room for the captions underneath here for this photo and for this one. Then I'm going to go around and fill in the rest of the layout with my graham crackers to indicate where I will have photos. So we're going to have this one go all the way down to the bottom, and then we're going to fill in there. We're going to leave this space open. And then I'm going to place another that one's kind of ugly. Ugly graham crackers are still loved. There we go. All right, so we have another photo here. We have another photo here. We skipped this eye line. And then the last photo I'm going to place right here. I'm going to pretend that that just fits perfectly, even though we all know it doesn't. But we're going to leave some white space up at the top and at this bottom part for the captions, as well as some white space in general. All right, so now you can see that we have our photos all filled in. This is really crucial that students understand that photos need to start and stop on grid lines, and then there needs to be 1 grid line in between each element. And so when you're going around and they have this, it's going to be kind of hard to tell where their separations are, like right here. But that's where you talk to them through it. And like, even though these are touching, you'll be like, okay, so what's this right here? You'll be like, yeah, there's a grid line. And so you just want to like coach them through it and make sure that when they translate this onto the computer and when they're drawing it later, that they skip a grid line in between those elements. All right, so the next thing that we're going to add to our spread are captions. And so we need to make sure that for each photo we have on this spread, we have space for a caption. All right, and for our captions, we're going to use Cheez-Its. And so we're going to take 2 Cheez-Its, and that's going to indicate 1 block of a caption. And so what's really important when you're figuring out where to put your captions, and this is probably one of the most challenging parts of layout design, is that you want your caption width, so ours is 2 Cheez-Its, to be the same throughout the entire spread, which can be really difficult sometimes when you've already designed your pictures, but you want to keep that in mind as you're designing. And so we're going to put some captions here. And so you can see there's 4 across. Remember, there's a space in between these. This caption might go to this photo. This caption would go to this one. We need space for 3 more, and we need a caption for our dominant. That's a question we get a lot: is does a dominant really need a caption because you have a whole story about it? The answer is yes. You need a caption for every single photo, even if it's just an identifier of who's in the photo. You definitely still need that. And so I'm going to put my caption for that photo right here. And then I'm going to put another one right here. And that's going to be where my caption is for the dominant photo. Because this goes over the gutter right here, it's okay that this caption is right here because it's on the same page that the picture is touching. If this picture as a dominant was all the way on this side, you want the caption on this side too. You don't want your caption for your dominant or anything on the opposite page of the picture because it's confusing as to where it is, as to where that caption is for that photo. I'm going to put another caption right next to it, similar to those, but there is a space in between here, you just can't quite see it. And that caption right here goes for this photo. And then this caption goes for this photo. All right, so the next thing that our spread needs is photo credit and story credit. And so for those, we're gonna use mini marshmallows. And I like to just place these on top of the photos, but just so you know, these can go in a lot of different places. Sometimes people put them on the photo in black or white. I like to do that just to make sure that each photo has one, but some people also put them inside the caption. At the end of it, they say photo by John Smith. Sometimes people put a little photo icon and then they, add that into the caption or somewhere else in the photo. Sometimes if all the photos were taken by one person, you can just add that somewhere on the spread, but you definitely want to make sure that every single photo that's taken in your entire book is properly credited to the photographer. I also like to add one, it's a little bit of a different element, but I like to add one here by the story because whoever did the story needs to be credited as well. Sometimes that's the same person as the person that did the whole spread. Sometimes that person, you don't credit it and attribute spreads to individual staff members because they're all kind of a group effort. That's totally fine. I just want to make sure that if it's something that needs to be credited, we don't forget that because sometimes we leave all that information out and we want to make sure it's in there. All right, so the next element we're going to add to our spread is the page numbers. In yearbook production, these are called the folios, and we're going to use Fruit Loops to indicate where these go. The only reason I like using Fruit Loops is because they're colorful, and so I like to incorporate the fact that you can design these. You want these to match your theme. You want them to be not just a regular page number in black text on a white background in whatever font you're using. You want them to be fun and incorporate design elements into your theme. And so say our theme is like blue and green. I'm going to take the blue and green ones and place them down here at the bottom to indicate our beautifully designed folios that go down there. So you can see we have we'll say page 2 and 3. All right, so the last 2 elements that we're going to add are optional, but it's helpful for students to learn the interface when this starts to translate onto the computer. And so for the first one, I like to use Skittles or M&Ms, and these indicate the swatches. And so I put them over here on the side where the swatch panel or wherever you change your colors is. And I use that as a moment to indicate that when you get to the computer, you're going to create this layout and there's going to be a lot of options over here to the side, and this is where you go to change stuff because it can be a little confusing for students when they first open a program. They don't know where to go for stuff, so this kind of leads them in that direction. And then similarly, I like to use a chocolate chip as like a cursor, like this is your pointer. In InDesign, it's over here. If you're using InDesign, you can also use a white one for the direct selection tool. In other programs, it's at the top or it's somewhere else, but indicate to your students where, this is melting in my hand, I'm gonna put it right there, indicate to your students where they can find their cursor when they need to click on things, because that can be helpful, again, to orient them into the program.
So, like I said in the beginning, what I like to do as a second part to Delicious Design is have them translate the layout they made with the food onto the computer. And so they go and they map out the layout they made with the food onto their actual paper sheet. And then the next day they come back in and build the entire thing in the software that they're creating their yearbook. And so they are drawing picture boxes and they're making sure they have an eye line and aligning all the elements and placing photos and putting text boxes, changing fonts. They're doing the whole thing like they will in Yearbook, and that takes time to learn the interface as well as just get down the rules of where things go. And so it's really good practice for them to be able to do that before they actually get to producing their yearbook. And so I have a couple of slides to show you just like how a spread like this evolves. The spread that we made with the food and the spread that you see here in front of you isn't bad, but it's basic. And so what I want to demonstrate for your students is that you start here, you learn the basics, you learn where things go, and then you can start to break those rules. But we start off with the basics. And so this is just filler text, filler pictures. It's, I guess, a football spread. But you can see we have a lot of varied content. So we have some individual pictures uh, of the coach. We have some with small group with only 2 people, like here. We have large group, and then we have some team pictures as well, and some action shots, and some, they're all candids. But so that's, something you could touch on too when teaching this lesson and building your own example that kind of portrays, this is what we want in a good yearbook spread, is all of these different elements. Um, but there's a couple things we can do to improve this to make it better. So the first thing is that typically you want all of your text to face the gutter, to be aligned to the gutter. And so right here, you can see these captions are all aligned to the left, and we want them, and these are also aligned to the left, but these are facing the gutter. The gutter is this middle part right here. And so very simply, we can just swap that uh, alignment on those captions on that left page, and instantly it just looks a lot more polished and clean and cohesive. Not a very big change, not a huge deal, but it's those little tiny details that make your book elevate to that next level. But if you want it to be elevated to the next level, let's replace some of this content. I just switched it on accident. Let's move me around. Let's replace some of this content with secondary coverage, or what we would call a module or a sidebar. And I'm going to knock out this photo that was right here and replace it with something a little bit different. So this could be like a timeline, a Q&A, a small story, a personality feature. It could be anatomy of a gym bag. Like, it can be anything that is just a little bit something different and extra. This one is just like a Q&A kind of. It's like, what do you think about this? And it has a quote from a student and then their picture. And there's 4 of them. So it gets more kids in the book. It adds visual interest, so it looks a little bit different than just another box. And it also includes student opinion about some other side topic. Especially if you have something like special that you want to cover, like you have a new coach, you have a new stadium, you have a freshman football team that got to the state finals for freshman football. I don't know, whatever it is, like, you want to be able to highlight those things and make them special. And so that's secondary coverage is a good way to highlight those things. And you can also incorporate your theme in those areas. So right now, the only theme element that we really included were these colors, the green and the blue. But you wouldn't just put black text with a black headline on the whole spread. You want to look for areas to incorporate those theme colors and design elements. So you can also see on all the captions, there's a mini headline with each caption. That's also referred to as like a lead-in or a subhead sometimes, even though that's not technically a subhead. So that is another area where you can incorporate that color. So this is already starting to look better. There's lots of varied content. It's looking good, right? But what if we want to incorporate a little bit more? We're like, okay, here we added a stroke around this main photo and a pull quote in really large font that matches the headline and a color. So it just adds, again, that next level of content. It makes the spread look more intentionally designed instead of just throwing pictures that look good and then captions that are in the right font. That's not enough. That's not a cohesive theme, even if you use the same font throughout the book. Okay, so a couple of examples of other things you can do. Then we put this picture and overlapped it a little bit and put a white border around it, or stroke. In graphic design, it's not called a border, it's called a stroke. But, we just very subtly added this little bit of dimension here, and it makes it look a little bit different, a little bit more interesting. And so if your theme was something about layers or puzzle pieces or something where the people are fitting together, that kind of design element matches that theme. And again, we said that we want elements 1 pica away from each other, and that's a rule, but this would be a good opportunity, especially if it relates to your theme, to break that rule. And maybe that's something that you do on every spread or every couple of spreads, or you do it throughout the book, and so it builds that cohesive visual. Another example, then we moved the headline onto the photo. This is really popular. It's a little difficult if you have a photo that has a white background or a black background and you're trying to make sure it's legible. So sometimes you have to do a little bit of photo editing to make it pop, but it can be really cool. I would just say caution you, make sure it's legible. Legibility is always number one. And you also want to make sure you're using like a thick font so you can see what the headline actually says. But that could be another way that you incorporate your theme. Maybe your dividers also have that, going down the side. You never know. Also, sideways text is a whole other element. And then this is another example of just something else you can do as a design element. There's like 100 million examples of things you can do to incorporate a theme design. But slants, is just one of many. If this was, I created this in Google Slides, so it's a little bit hard to uh, design in Google Slides. But as an example, you can see like the slants are there. But I would also pull this story and have it line up into this little triangle area, and that would further like drive home that slant. I wouldn't leave that white space there just as like awkward triangle. And then I would like cuddle, I always say cuddle those headlines up into here, let them be a little closer. You want things to have room to breathe, I say. Like you always want like a good thick amount of white space in between elements, between photos and text still, but you want them to be like they fit into each other at the same time. So there's a fine balance between room to breathe and cuddling together. And then same thing with this photo here. I would make a new text box in a different shape, and this line would actually follow along this slant here. And so this little triangle would also be filled in with this picture of these fans. And then these captions would also be slanted, that text box along this edge as well. So it would kind of make that slant, it would fill in those gaps of those triangles. But you can see looking at this spread versus this spread, they're very, very, very similar, but this one is more complete. It's more cohesive. And then if you see this next to other spreads in the book, it's going to make sense because you can tell there's design elements, there's slants, there's colors, there's other pull quotes, there's other circle headshots throughout the book that are done with intention. So that's all I have for you for this lesson. I hope that it was helpful. If you have any questions at all, I am more than accessible. I love when people ask questions. I am here to help you. You can reach out to me directly at Katie, Katie, at organizedadvisor.com, or just head to the website and submit a contact form. It goes straight to me. All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.